Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you 7 deeply disturbing true Seattle horror stories that will shatter everything you thought you knew about the Pacific Northwest's most iconic city. These are not fictional tales, but real encounters shared by people who experienced the darkness lurking beneath Seattle's rain-soaked streets and fog-covered hills. Each account has been meticulously documented through first-hand testimonies, police reports, and historical records that verify the terrifying events you are about to hear. From the haunted corridors of Pike Place Market to the shadowed trails of the Cascade foothills, from the underground passages forgotten by time to the modern high-rises of South Lake Union, Seattle harbors secrets that most residents will never discover. And perhaps that is for the best. Tonight, you will hear from 7 individuals whose lives were forever changed by encounters with predators, spirits, and phenomena that defy rational explanation. If you appreciate authentic horror content drawn from verified true events that will keep you awake long after the video ends, subscribe to Buried Files and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into the darkness that hides in plain sight. After you listen to these chilling accounts, we want to hear from you in the comments below about your own experiences with the unexplained. Now settle in as we descend into the buried files of Seattle's most disturbing true horror stories. This happened when I was about 14 years old, living in Capitol Hill, just a few blocks from the old Harvard Exit Theater. My name is George, and back then I thought I knew Seattle inside and out. I had grown up in the city, rode the bus alone since I was 12, and considered myself pretty street smart for a kid who spent most of his time reading comic books and playing video games. Looking back now, I realize how naive I actually was. How close I came to becoming another statistic, another missing person poster taped to a telephone pole that people walk past without really seeing. It was a Thursday in early November, one of those gray Seattle afternoons where the sky hangs so low and heavy that it feels like you could reach up and touch it. The rain had been coming down steady all day. Not the violent downpour that tourists always expect, but that persistent drizzle that seeps into your bones and makes everything smell like wet concrete and coffee. School had just let out, and my friend Isabella and I had decided to walk through Pike Place Market on our way home instead of taking the bus. We did this sometimes when we wanted to avoid going straight home to empty apartments and the monotony of homework. The market was always alive, always full of people and noise and the smell of fresh flowers mixed with fish and fried food. Isabella had been my best friend since the 6th grade. She was one of those people who seemed to have a sixth sense about situations, about people. She could walk into a room and immediately tell you which person was lying, which one was hiding something, which one you should avoid. I used to tease her about it, called her psychic, but she would just shrug and say she paid attention to details that other people ignored. That afternoon, her instinct saved both of our lives. We were walking past the flower vendors, and I was trying to convince Isabella to stop at the comic book shop on First Avenue before heading home, when a man approached us. He was maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, tall and slim with dark hair going gray at the temples. He wore a nice pea coat, dark jeans, and leather shoes that looked expensive. Everything about him screamed professional, respectable, harmless. He had a camera hanging around his neck, one of those big digital cameras that photographers use, and he was smiling at us in a friendly, non-threatening way. He said hello, apologized for interrupting, and then launched into his pitch. He explained that he was a photographer working on a feature story for Seattle Metropolitan magazine about youth culture in the city. He said he had been walking through the market looking for interesting subjects when he spotted us. He said we had exactly the kind of authentic Seattle look he was searching for, whatever that meant. He asked if we would be willing to pose for a few photographs down by the waterfront. He would pay us $50 each for maybe 30 minutes of our time. All we had to do was walk around, maybe sit on a bench, just act natural while he took pictures. He said our parents would need to sign release forms before the photos could be published, and he had the paperwork right there in his bag. $50 was a lot of money to me back then. I was already thinking about what I could buy, already imagining myself telling my mom about this cool opportunity. I looked at Isabella, expecting to see excitement. But instead, her face had gone completely blank. Not scared, not angry, just empty in a way that made my stomach clench with sudden unease. The man was still talking, explaining how the shoot would work, showing us examples of his work on his camera screen. The photos looked professional, legitimately artistic shots of other teenagers around Pike Place Market and the waterfront. Everything seemed legitimate. Everything seemed safe. But Isabella was not moving, was not smiling, was just staring at this man with those dark eyes that seemed to be processing information I could not see. Then the man made his first mistake. He reached out and put his hand on my shoulder, guiding me gently toward the market exit that led down to the street level and the waterfront below. His grip was firm, friendly, paternal even. But Isabella immediately stepped between us, breaking the contact. She said thank you, but we had to get home. Our parents were expecting us. The man's smile never wavered. He said it would only take 30 minutes, that we could call our parents right now and let them know. He was already walking, already moving us away from the crowded main arcade of the market toward the quieter side passages. Isabella grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. She said no, we had to go. We were already late. I was confused, a little annoyed even. This seemed like easy money, a cool story to tell at school. But something in Isabella's voice made me pause, made me actually look at the situation instead of just seeing what I wanted to see. The man's smile had changed. It was still there, still plastered across his face, but it no longer reached his eyes. His eyes had gone flat and cold, calculating. He was no longer asking, he was telling. He said the best light for photographs was down by the piers, under the Alaskan Way Viaduct, where the late afternoon sun created interesting shadows. He said he had already scouted the perfect location, very atmospheric, very Seattle. He was walking faster now, and we were following, caught in the momentum of his certainty, his authority. That is when Isabella did something that probably saved our lives. She stopped walking, turned to me, and said very loudly that she had just remembered we were supposed to meet her mom at the Starbucks on First Avenue 10 minutes ago. That her mom was going to be furious we were late. The lie was so specific, so believable, delivered with such conviction that even I almost believed it for a second. She grabbed my hand and started pulling me back toward the main market arcade, toward the crowds and the noise and the safety of witnesses. The man's expression finally cracked. For just a moment, I saw something beneath the friendly photographer mask. Something ugly and angry and predatory. He called after us, said we were being rude, that we had wasted his time. His voice had changed too, had lost that warm professional tone, and taken on an edge that made the hair on my neck stand up. We did not run at first. We walked quickly, purposefully, back through the market. But then we heard footsteps behind us, quick and determined, and Isabella whispered, "Run." So we ran. We ran through the market, dodging tourists and vendors, our shoes slapping on the wet tile floors. We ran down Post Alley, that narrow brick passage that runs behind the market, where the famous gum wall creates a sticky rainbow of colors, and the smell of rain mixes with the sweet rot of old chewing gum. I could hear him behind us. could hear his breathing and his footsteps echoing off the brick walls. The alley was nearly empty. Just a few people with umbrellas hurrying to wherever they needed to be, not paying attention to two kids running like their lives depended on it. Isabella pulled me into a small Italian restaurant, one of those cramped places with checkered tablecloths and old photos of Italy on the walls. We pushed through the door so hard that the bell above it clattered wildly, causing everyone inside to look up. We ran to the back of the restaurant, past confused diners, and I pressed my face against the rain-streaked window that looked out onto Post Alley. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I was breathing in short gasps that made my chest hurt. Isabella was next to me, silent and watchful, her hand still gripping mine. We saw him come around the corner. He had stopped running and was walking now, scanning the alley, looking in the windows of shops and restaurants. He walked past our window, so close I could have reached out and touched the glass. He stood there for a moment right outside, and I held my breath, terrified that he would look in, that he would see us. But he was looking ahead, searching the alley beyond. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, he finally walked away, disappearing around a corner. A waiter approached us, asked if we were okay, if we needed help. Isabella, calm as anything, told him we were fine. We were just waiting for the rain to let up before walking home. The waiter looked skeptical, but nodded and went back to work. We stayed there for another 30 minutes, watching the alley, making sure the man was really gone before we finally left. We did not talk about it on the walk home. We did not talk about it the next day at school. It was not until almost 3 weeks later, when Isabella called me crying, that we finally acknowledged what had almost happened. She had been watching the local news with her mom and had seen a story about a man arrested near the Seattle waterfront for attempting to abduct a teenage girl. He had approached her outside Pike Place Market, claimed to be a photographer working on a magazine story, offered her money to pose for pictures down by the piers. But this girl had run immediately, had screamed, had caused enough of a scene that witnesses intervened and police were called. The news showed his photo. It was him. Same face, same peacoat, same camera. The reporter said police believed he had been using the photographer's story for months, maybe years, targeting teenagers around Pike Place Market and other tourist areas. They had found photographs in his apartment, hundreds of them, of kids around the city. They were investigating whether he was connected to several missing person cases going back over a decade. I felt sick. I felt cold and hollow and terrified in a way I had never experienced before. We had been so close. If Isabella had not insisted we leave, if she had not grabbed my hand and run, if we had followed him down to those deserted piers under the viaduct where the homeless sleep in cardboard shelters and nobody pays attention to screams that might just be seagulls, I did not want to think about what would have happened. I still do not want to think about it. To this day, I never walk through Post Alley without looking over my shoulder. I am 32 years old now, and I still feel a spike of anxiety when I see someone with a professional camera approaching strangers on the street. I still think about how easily I was fooled, how eagerly I was ready to follow a predator to a secondary location for $50 and the chance to be in a magazine. I think about Isabella's instinct, her immediate recognition that something was wrong even when everything seemed right. I think about the girl who screamed, who fought, who created a scene and got him arrested. I think about all the kids who maybe were not as lucky, who did not have an Isabella, who did not run fast enough. Seattle is a beautiful city. It is my home and I love it. But it taught me young that monsters do not always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like photographers with nice cameras and professional smiles. Sometimes they walk right up to you in the middle of a crowded market and offer you exactly what a lonely, naive kid wants to hear. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, you have a friend who sees through the disguise and pulls you back from the edge before it is too late. My family has lived in Seattle since the 1920s, and my grandmother used to tell me stories about the old Butterworth building on Pike Street. But I never believed her until I started working there. My name is Isabella, and I have always considered myself a rational person, someone who needs evidence and logic to accept something as true. I do not believe in astrology or psychics or any of that supernatural nonsense that seems so popular in Seattle these days. Or at least, I did not believe in it. What happened to me in that building changed everything I thought I knew about the world. The Butterworth building is one of those places in Seattle that most people walk past without really seeing. It sits on Pike Street, not far from the convention center, a solid brick structure that has survived earthquakes and urban renewal and all the changes that have transformed Seattle from a frontier town into a tech hub. Most people who do notice it these days know it as a collection of small businesses, vintage shops, and creative studios. But my grandmother remembered what it was before. She remembered when it was Butterworth and Sons, the most prominent mortuary and funeral home in Seattle, a place where the dead were prepared for their final journey. She used to tell me stories when I was a child, stories about that building that would make my skin crawl. She said that during the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, the mortuary was overwhelmed with bodies. So many people died so quickly that Butterworth and Sons could barely keep up with the demand. The basement was converted into a temporary morgue, and bodies were stacked in the embalming rooms like cordwood, waiting their turn. She said many of those bodies were children, orphans from the quarantine hospitals who had no family to claim them, no one to mourn them or remember their names. She said their spirits never left, that they were still down there in the basement, waiting for someone to take them home. I always dismissed these stories as the superstitions of an old woman who had grown up in a different time, a time when people believed in ghosts and hauntings because they did not understand science or psychology. I would smile and nod and change the subject, never taking any of it seriously. That was my mistake. I was 23 years old when I took a job at a vintage clothing shop called Ephemera that had opened in part of the old Butterworth building. The space was beautiful in that industrial way that is so popular now. All exposed brick and high ceilings and original hardwood floors worn smooth by a century of footsteps. The shop occupied what had once been the main viewing parlor on the ground floor, where families would gather to pay their respects to their dead. The basement, I was told during my interview, was used for storage. The owner, a woman named Caroline who wore vintage dresses and bright red lipstick, gave me a tour on my first day. She showed me the main floor where we displayed the clothing, the small office in the back where we handled paperwork and online orders, and finally the basement. We descended a narrow wooden staircase that creaked with every step, and I felt the temperature drop noticeably as we went down. The basement was larger than I expected, a series of connected rooms with low ceilings and bare bulb lighting that cast harsh shadows on the brick walls. Caroline explained that we kept overflow inventory down here, boxes of clothing organized by decade and style. She showed me the system, explained how to log items in and out, told me that I would need to come down here several times a day to retrieve pieces for customers or restock the floor displays. Then she paused at the entrance to one of the rooms at the far end of the basement, a room that was darker than the others, and said something that should have been a warning. She said that room gave her the creeps, that she tried to avoid storing anything in there if possible. She said sometimes she heard noises coming from that direction, like machinery running or water dripping. even though there was no plumbing or electrical equipment in that part of the basement. She laughed nervously when she said it, like she was embarrassed to admit such an irrational feeling. I laughed too, trying to put her at ease, and said old buildings always made strange noises. She seemed relieved that I was not the superstitious type. The first few weeks at the job were completely normal. I enjoyed the work, enjoyed helping customers find the perfect vintage piece, enjoyed the quiet moments when the shop was empty and I could organize inventory or read behind the counter. The basement trips were unremarkable. I would go down, find what I needed, and come back up. Nothing strange, nothing unusual, just a cold basement in an old building. Then things started to change. It began with the cold spots. I would be walking through the basement, perfectly comfortable in my sweater, and suddenly hit a pocket of air so cold that my breath would fog in front of my face. These spots were not near any windows or doors, not anywhere that would explain a draft. They were just there, random patches of freezing air that I would walk through and then immediately back into the normal basement temperature. I told myself it was old building ventilation, uneven heating, something perfectly rational. Next came the sounds. I would be alone in the basement, sorting through boxes of 1960s shift dresses or 1940s suits. And I would hear what sounded like an elevator running. It was a distinctive sound, that mechanical whine of cables and pulleys, the clunk of doors opening and closing. But there was no elevator in the basement, at least not one that worked. Caroline had told me there used to be a service elevator that connected all the floors, the one they used to move caskets and bodies. But it had been sealed shut decades ago when the building was renovated. I would stop what I was doing and listen, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It always seemed to be coming from that far room, the one Caroline said gave her the creeps. The sound would last for maybe 30 seconds, then stop abruptly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than it should. I started to feel uneasy in the basement, started to rush through my tasks down there so I could get back upstairs to the natural light and the presence of customers. I did not tell Caroline about the sounds. I did not want her to think I was as superstitious as she was, did not want to validate her irrational fears with my own. Then one evening, everything changed. It was late October, almost closing time. Caroline had left early for a dentist appointment, leaving me to close the shop alone. It was something I had done several times before without incident. I was going through the closing checklist, counting the register, tidying the displays, preparing the deposit. The last task was always to go down to the basement and make sure all the lights were off and the back door was locked. I descended the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty building. I walked through the first room, switching off lights as I went. Then the second room, then the third. I was heading toward that far room, the creepy one, when I heard something that made my blood run cold. Children laughing. It was not loud, not raucous playground laughter, but soft and distant, like it was coming from very far away or from behind a thick wall. It had an odd quality to it, echoey and slightly distorted, like an old recording played through damaged speakers. I stopped walking and listened, my heart starting to pound in my chest. The laughter continued for a few seconds, then faded away. I told myself I had imagined it, that it was just sounds from the street above filtering down through the old building in strange ways. But my hands were shaking as I continued toward the back of the basement. That is when I noticed that the door to the far room was open. I was absolutely certain I had not opened it, and Caroline never stored anything in there. The door should have been closed. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and leave, to go back upstairs and forget about checking that room. but I could not leave without making sure everything was secure. It was my responsibility. I reached the doorway and looked inside. The room was empty except for a few broken wooden chairs stacked in one corner. The single bare bulb that hung from the ceiling was on, casting everything in harsh white light that created deep shadows. I stepped inside to turn off the light, and that is when the smell hit me. Formaldehyde. That sharp, chemical smell that makes your eyes water and your throat close up. It was so strong it made me gag, made me put my hand over my nose and mouth. There was no reason for that smell to be there. The building had not been a mortuary in over 40 years. Nothing in our vintage clothing inventory would smell like that. I backed toward the door, my eyes watering, desperate to get out of that room and back to fresh air. That is when I heard footsteps on the stairs behind me. Small footsteps, like a child's, descending the wooden stairs. I froze, listening to the rhythmic creak, creak, creak of someone coming down. But I was supposed to be alone in the building. I had locked the front door myself. No one could have come in. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. I stood perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Then I heard them again, closer now, coming through the first room of the basement toward where I stood. I wanted to run, wanted to scream, but I could not seem to make my body obey. I just stood there, frozen, as those small footsteps came closer and closer. Then I saw him. He was standing in the doorway of the far room, a small figure barely 4 feet tall. He looked like he was maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing clothes from another era, old-fashioned clothes like you would see in photographs from the 1910s. Short pants, a button-up shirt, suspenders. His face was pale, so pale it almost seemed to glow in the harsh basement light. His eyes were dark and sunken, and they were staring right at me. We looked at each other for what could have been seconds or hours. Time seemed to have stopped, seemed to have lost all meaning in that cold basement with the smell of formaldehyde and the sound of my heart hammering in my ears. Then the boy spoke. His voice was quiet, barely a whisper, but I heard it clearly. He said, "I want to go home." That broke the spell. I screamed and ran. I ran through the basement rooms, up the stairs, through the shop, out the front door onto Pike Street. I stood on the sidewalk, gasping for air, shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. People walking past looked at me strangely, gave me a wide berth, probably thought I was drunk or high or crazy. I could not go back inside. I called Carolyn and told her I had a family emergency, that I had to leave immediately. She was concerned, asked if I was okay, if there was anything she could do. I said no, everything was fine, I just had to go. I left the keys in the mail slot and never went back. I quit the next day by text message, gave some excuse about taking a job closer to home. Caroline was disappointed but understanding. She paid me for my final week and wished me well. I never told her what I saw. What would be the point? She would either think I was crazy or be forced to confront something she clearly already suspected about that building. But I could not leave it alone. I needed to understand what I had seen, needed some rational explanation that would let me sleep at night. So I started researching the history of the Butterworth building, digging through old newspaper archives at the Seattle Public Library, looking through historical society records, anything I could find about the mortuary and what happened there. What I discovered made everything worse. During the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, Seattle was hit particularly hard. The mortuary records from Butterworth and Sons during that period showed they processed over 300 bodies in a 6-week span. triple their normal capacity. Many of those bodies were children who had died in the quarantine hospitals and orphanages. At least 47 children were processed through that basement with no family to claim them, no one to arrange funerals or burials. They were buried in unmarked graves in a pauper's section of the cemetery, their names recorded only in the mortuary ledgers. I found their names, all 47 of them, listed in fading ink in a ledger book that was more than a century old. Children aged 2 to 12, dead from influenza, alone and forgotten. The ledger noted that most of them were prepared for burial in the basement embalming rooms because the main floor viewing parlors were constantly occupied with paying customers, with families who could afford proper funerals. I think about that boy I saw sometimes. Think about his pale face and his dark eyes and his small voice saying he wanted to go home. I think about all those children who died alone in quarantine, who were processed like inventory in a basement, who were buried without ceremony in graves that do not even have headstones. I think about how their last moments on earth were in that cold basement that smells like formaldehyde, and how maybe some part of them never left. I still drive past that building sometimes when I am in that part of town. I cannot help it. I always slow down and look at the basement windows, those small windows at street level that are usually dark. And sometimes, I swear I can see small faces watching from inside, pale and patient, still waiting after all these years for someone to take them home. I am an avid hiker, and I thought I knew every trail in the Cascades within 50 miles of Seattle. But I had never heard of the 13 steps until I stumbled onto them. My name is Harry, and I have been hiking the Pacific Northwest since I was a teenager. I know these mountains, know these forests, know the way the light filters through the old-growth cedars and Douglas firs in that specific green-gold way that exists nowhere else on Earth. I thought I knew what to expect out there. I thought the wilderness held no surprises for me anymore. I was wrong. It was early September, that perfect time of year when the summer heat has broken, but the fall rains have not yet begun in earnest. The trails are empty of tourists, the foliage is still green and lush, and you can hike for hours without seeing another soul. That is exactly what I was looking for that Saturday morning when I drove out to the Maltby area, to a trailhead I had hiked dozens of times before. I was alone, which was not unusual for me. My friends often complained that I was too intense about hiking, that I moved too fast and wanted to cover too many miles for a casual weekend outing. So I'd gotten used to going solo, used to the solitude and the rhythm of my own footsteps on the trail, the sound of my own breathing in the quiet forest. I enjoyed it. There is something meditative about hiking alone, something that clears the mind and strips away all the noise of daily life. I had seen photos online of a waterfall in this area, a small cascade that was supposed to be particularly beautiful this time of year. The photos showed moss-covered rocks and water tumbling into a clear pool, sunlight breaking through the canopy in dramatic rays. It looked like something out of a fantasy movie, and I wanted to see it in person, wanted to photograph it myself. The problem was that the exact location was not marked on any trail map. The photographer who posted the images had been deliberately vague about where it was, probably trying to keep the spot from being overrun. So I was improvising, using the photos as reference and my own knowledge of the area to guess where the waterfall might be. I hiked the main trail for about 2 miles, then started looking for places where a smaller creek might branch off, where there might be a cascade hidden back in the trees. After another half-hour of searching, I spotted what looked like an old trail, barely visible, overgrown with ferns and salal, but still showing the slight depression in the forest floor that indicates a path. I followed it. The trail was narrow and steep, winding between massive cedars and over fallen logs slick with moss and fungi. I had to watch my footing carefully, had to use my hands sometimes to steady myself on the rocks. The forest grew darker as I went deeper, the canopy closing overhead until only scattered patches of light made it through to the forest floor. It was beautiful, in that primal, slightly unsettling way that old-growth forest can be, where you feel very small and very temporary in the presence of trees that have been standing for centuries. I hiked for maybe 20 minutes on this overgrown path, and I was starting to think I had made a mistake, that this trail was not going to lead anywhere useful, when I came around a bend and saw them. The steps. They were made of stone, old stone worn smooth by time and weather. They descended into the earth at a steep angle, disappearing into darkness below. There were 13 of them. I counted. Each step was maybe 8 inches high and 2 feet deep, cut from what looked like granite or some other hard stone. They led down to an iron door set into the hillside, a door that looked like it belonged to a root cellar or some kind of old storage facility. The door was rusted and weathered, but still solid. It had a heavy iron handle and what looked like the remains of a padlock, broken and hanging loose. There was no sign indicating what this was, no historical marker or explanation, just steps leading down to a door in the middle of nowhere, miles from any road or building. I stood there for a long moment, trying to figure out what I was looking at. Was this some kind of old mine entrance? A forgotten bunker from World War II? The Cascades are full of abandoned infrastructure from logging operations and early settlements, places that nature has been slowly reclaiming for decades. This could be anything. Curiosity got the better of caution. I descended the steps, counting as I went. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. The air grew noticeably colder as I descended, and I could smell earth and stone and something else. Something organic and slightly rotten like mushrooms or decay. At the bottom, I reached out and touched the iron door. It was warm, not hot, but distinctly warm to the touch, which made no sense given the cold air surrounding it. I tried the handle. It was locked or stuck or both. The door would not budge. I put my ear against the metal and listened. At first, I heard nothing, just the faint sound of wind in the trees above me. But then, very faintly, I heard something else. Voices. Multiple voices speaking in unison, a rhythmic chanting or singing that was too muffled for me to make out words. It sounded like it was coming from far away, from deep underground. Every rational part of my brain was telling me this was just acoustics, just sound traveling in strange ways through the earth and the old door. Maybe there were hikers somewhere nearby, and their voices were carrying through some underground passage or rock formation. But it did not sound like casual conversation. It sounded deliberate, ritualistic, like a prayer or an incantation. I stepped back from the door, suddenly very aware of how alone I was, how far from the main trail, how no one knew exactly where I had gone. If something happened to me out here, if I got hurt or lost, it could be days before anyone found me. The thought sent a spike of anxiety through my chest. I turned to climb back up the steps, ready to leave this strange place behind and return to the familiar comfort of the marked trail. I put my foot on the first step and started counting as I climbed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14. I stopped climbing and counted again. 14 steps. But there had been 13 when I came down. I was sure of it. I had counted carefully. 13 steps down to the door. That is why I had noticed them in the first place, why they had stuck in my mind. But now, there were 14 steps leading back up to the forest floor. I looked back down at the door. It was still there, still closed, still radiating that inexplicable warmth. The chanting had stopped. Everything was silent except for my own harsh breathing and the distant sound of wind in the trees. I counted the steps again, touching each one as I went. 14. Definitely 14. That is when I heard the sound behind me from the direction of the door. The scrape of metal on metal, like a handle being turned, like a door being opened. I did not look back. I just ran. I scrambled up those 14 steps as fast as I could, using my hands, my feet slipping on the smooth stone. I could hear footsteps behind me now, heavy footsteps climbing from the door, someone or something following me up from that dark place below the earth. I reached the top of the steps and kept running, crashing through the ferns and salal, not caring about the noise I was making, not caring about the branches that whipped across my face and arms. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like rubber, until I broke out of the overgrown trail back onto the main hiking path. Only then did I stop and look back, gasping for breath, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. There was nothing behind me, just trees and ferns and filtered sunlight. No footsteps, no pursuer, just the quiet forest. I stood there for a long time, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself that I had panicked over nothing, that I had let my imagination run away with me in a moment of disorientation. But I could not shake the feeling that something had been following me. That if I had looked back at that door, I would have seen something I was not meant to see. I made my way back to the trailhead, back to my car. I did not try to find the waterfall. I just wanted to be out of those woods, wanted to be around other people, wanted to be somewhere that made sense. But I could not leave it alone. When I got home, I started searching online for any information about stone steps in the Maltby area, about old structures or historical sites in those woods. I found nothing. Then I started searching for urban legends, for strange stories about the Cascades near Seattle. That is when I found a forum post from 3 years ago. Someone else had found the steps. They described them exactly as I had seen them, 13 stone steps leading down to an iron door. But this person had tried to open the door and claimed to have gotten it partially open before fear drove them away. They said they saw torchlight inside, saw what looked like a stone chamber stretching back into the hillside, saw figures in robes standing in a circle around something on the floor. They ran, just like I had. The comments on that post were mostly dismissive. People saying it was a creative writing exercise or someone looking for attention. But one comment stuck with me. It was from a user with no profile picture and a randomly generated username. They wrote that in the 1970s, a group calling themselves the Temple of the Earth Mother had purchased land in the Maltby area and built an underground sanctuary for their rituals. The cult had disbanded in the early 1980s after several members disappeared and others reported being held against their will. Police had raided the property but found nothing, no buildings, no people, no evidence of any crime. The land was eventually sold at auction, and the whole incident was largely forgotten. The comment ended with a warning. They said that anyone who counts all the steps and opens the door joins the temple, that you become part of their circle whether you want to or not, that the number of steps changes depending on whether you are being invited in or driven away. They said if you are meant to join them, you will count 13 steps down and 13 steps up, and the door will open easily. But if you are not meant to be there, the number of steps will change, and you will hear them coming for you. I do not know if any of that is true. I do not know if that forum post was real or if the comment was just someone playing along with a scary story. But I do know what I experienced. I know I counted 13 steps down and 14 steps back up. I know I heard footsteps following me. I know that door was warm when it should have been cold. A week later, I went back to that trailhead. I told myself I was going to hike the main trail, nothing more, just a normal Saturday morning in the woods. But when I reached the spot where I had found that overgrown path, where I had turned off to search for the waterfall, I could not find it again. I searched for an hour, walking back and forth along the main trail, looking for any sign of that smaller path leading into the trees. It was not there. The forest looked different. The trees were wrong. The spacing was off. I could not find the path that led to those 13 steps. I have not been hiking alone since, and I never will again. I bring friends now, or I stick to crowded trails where there are always other people around. I still love the mountains, still love the forests of the Pacific Northwest. But I no longer believe I know everything that is out there. I no longer believe the wilderness is empty of mysteries, that all the hidden places have been found and mapped and explained. There are things in those woods that we are not meant to understand, places we are not meant to go. The 13 steps are one of those places. And whatever is waiting behind that iron door, whatever keeps that underground sanctuary alive decades after the cult supposedly disbanded, I hope I never find out. I hope those steps stay lost in the forest where they belong, where only those who are meant to find them will count their way down into the darkness below. Before we get started on this story, it mentions psychological abuse, gaslighting, and a mental health crisis. If that is too dark for you, go ahead and stop listening right now. I am going to give you some time to decide. Okay. For all those who want to continue listening, let us begin. I was 26 years old, fresh out of grad school, and I had just landed my dream job at a tech company in South Lake Union. That is where I met Arthur. My name is Poppy, and for a long time after what happened, I questioned everything about myself, questioned my own sanity, questioned whether I could trust my own mind. That is what he wanted. That was always the point. Arthur was a software engineer, one of those people who seem to excel at everything effortlessly. He was charming and confident, always knew the right thing to say, always seemed genuinely interested in what you had to tell him. We met at a company happy hour, one of those awkward networking events where everyone stands around drinking overpriced cocktails and pretending to enjoy small talk. He approached me with an easy smile and started a conversation about the book I was reading on the bus that morning. I was surprised he had noticed, flattered that he had paid attention. We started dating within a week. He took me to nice restaurants, knew all the best hidden spots in Seattle, introduced me to his friends who all seemed smart and successful and welcoming. Everything moved quickly, but it felt right. It felt like I had finally found someone who understood me, who appreciated me for who I was. My friends were happy for me. My sister Daisy said she had never seen me so relaxed, so confident. The first strange thing happened about a month into our relationship. I came home from work to find my apartment keys sitting on my kitchen counter. I distinctly remembered putting them in my purse that morning, remembered the weight of them, remembered checking that I had them before I left. But there they were, on the counter, exactly where I would have left them if I had been home. I called Arthur confused, asked him if he had stopped by my apartment. He said no, said I must have forgotten and left them there in the morning rush. I almost believed him. Almost. Then it happened again and again. Small things. My phone would be in a different room than where I left it. The coffee mug I was certain I had washed would be dirty in the sink. Books would be open to pages I did not remember reading. Clothes would be hanging in my closet that I did not recall wearing. Each incident was small enough to dismiss, small enough to blame on my own distraction or forgetfulness. But they kept happening, kept accumulating, until I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Arthur was always sympathetic, always concerned. He would hold me and tell me I was working too hard, that the stress of the new job was affecting me. He suggested I start keeping a journal to track my daily activities, to help me remember things better. It seemed like good advice. I started writing everything down, every detail of my day, trying to create some kind of anchor to reality. But the journal made things worse. Arthur would show me entries I did not remember writing, conversations I apparently had but could not recall, appointments I had supposedly made and then forgotten. He would read them to me in my own handwriting, and I would have no memory of putting those words on paper. I started to panic, started to think something was seriously wrong with my brain. Was I having blackouts? Was there some kind of neurological issue causing memory loss? Arthur convinced me to see a therapist. He came with me to the first appointment, held my hand in the waiting room, explained to the doctor that I was having severe memory problems and mood swings. The therapist was kind but clearly concerned. She ordered tests, asked me questions about my family history, about drug use, about trauma. I answered honestly, desperately wanting to understand what was happening to me. The tests came back normal. Physically, there was nothing wrong with my brain. The therapist suggested it might be psychological, stress-induced dissociation, or anxiety manifesting as memory issues. She prescribed medication and suggested I take some time off work to focus on my mental health. I did. I took medical leave, spent my days at home trying to rest, trying to get better. That is when Arthur moved in. He said he wanted to take care of me, said I should not be alone while I was struggling. It made sense at the time. I needed help, and he was offering it. But once he was living in my apartment, things got worse. Much worse. My friends stopped calling. When I asked Arthur about it, he showed me text messages from my phone to theirs, messages where I apparently told them I needed space, that I did not want to see them anymore. The messages were in my texting style, used my typical phrases and emojis. But I had no memory of sending them. When I tried to call my friends directly, they sounded hurt and distant. They said I had been acting strange, saying horrible things about them to Arthur, accusing them of trying to sabotage my relationship. I confronted Arthur about it. He looked genuinely confused, genuinely hurt that I would accuse him of anything. He showed me my journal entries where I had apparently written about how my friends were jealous of my happiness, how they were trying to come between us. He showed me my phone records proving the messages had come from my device. What could I say? The evidence was all there, in my own hand, from my own phone. I started to believe I was going insane. Started to think that maybe I was doing these things, saying these things, and then blocking them out. Maybe the person I thought I was did not actually exist. Maybe I was someone else entirely, someone cruel and paranoid and unstable, and the real me was just now coming to the surface. Arthur was patient through all of it. He took care of me, cooked my meals, managed my medications, kept track of my appointments. He was always there, always watching, always knowing exactly where I was and what I was doing. At the time, it felt like love, like devotion. Looking back, I understand it was control. The night everything changed, I could not sleep. The medication made me drowsy, but also gave me vivid, disturbing dreams that would jolt me awake in a panic. It was maybe 3 in the morning, and Arthur was asleep next to me, his breathing deep and even. I got up carefully, trying not to wake him, and went into the living room. I sat on the couch in the dark, trying to calm my racing thoughts, trying to figure out how my life had fallen apart so completely in just a few months. That is when I saw his laptop. He had left it open on the coffee table, the screen dark, but not closed. I had never looked through Arthur's computer before, had never felt the need to. But something made me reach out that night, made me tap the keyboard to wake the screen. It was not password protected. The browser was still open to a tab, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. It was a forum, some kind of online community I had never heard of. The thread Arthur had been reading was titled Advanced Gaslighting Techniques. I scrolled through it, my hands shaking, reading post after post from people discussing how to psychologically manipulate their partners, how to make someone doubt their own reality, how to isolate them from friends and family. Arthur had been an active participant. He had dozens of posts asking for advice, sharing his own experiences, bragging about his successes. He described what he was doing to me in clinical detached language like I was some kind of experiment. He talked about installing spyware on my phone that let him send messages as me and delete incoming calls and texts. He talked about how he would sneak into my apartment before we were officially dating and move things around to make me think I was forgetful. He talked about writing in my journal while I slept, mimicking my handwriting after weeks of practice. I kept reading, kept clicking through his post history, discovering more and more evidence of a calculated, systematic campaign to destroy my sense of self. He had been planning this from the beginning, had targeted me specifically because I seemed trusting and compliant. He had researched psychological conditioning techniques, had studied how to break someone down and rebuild them as someone dependent and controllable. I felt like I was going to be sick. I felt rage and horror and a strange kind of relief all at once. I was not crazy. I had not been imagining things or forgetting things or losing my grip on reality. Everything that had happened was real, was intentional, was done to me deliberately by someone I loved and trusted. I took photos of everything with my phone, screenshots of the forum posts, pictures of the laptop screen. I worked quickly and quietly, terrified that Arthur would wake up and catch me. When I had documented everything I could find, I closed the laptop and went back to the bedroom. I climbed into bed next to him, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would wake him. But he just slept on, peaceful and undisturbed. I did not sleep at all that night. I lay there in the dark, planning. I could not confront him. I could not let him know that I knew. Men like Arthur, men who were capable of this kind of calculated cruelty, were dangerous when cornered. I needed to be smart. I needed to get out safely. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. I smiled and ate the breakfast Arthur made me and took the medication he handed me. I watched him get ready for work, kissed him goodbye at the door, and the moment he was gone, I started packing. I took only what I could carry, only what was essential. I called my sister Daisy from a payphone in a grocery store parking lot because I did not trust my own cell phone anymore. I told her everything, sent her the screenshots, begged her to let me stay with her in Tacoma. She came to get me within 2 hours. We drove away from my apartment, away from Seattle, away from Arthur and the life he had constructed for me. I filed a police report that same day. I got a restraining order with the evidence I had gathered. The police told me what Arthur had done was not technically illegal in all aspects, that psychological abuse was difficult to prosecute. but the spyware and unauthorized access to my phone and computer could potentially result in charges. So this is part 2. Arthur violated the restraining order within a week. He showed up at Daisy's workplace, claiming he was worried about me, that I had stopped taking my medication and was having a mental health crisis. Daisy called the police and he was arrested. But he only received probation, a slap on the wrist for what he had done to me. That is when the real harassment started. He created fake social media profiles and sent messages to my friends and family claiming I was dangerous and unstable. He sent letters to my employer with detailed accounts of my supposed mental health issues, trying to get me fired. He filed false police reports claiming I was harassing him, violating the restraining order, stalking him. It was his final attempt to make me seem crazy, to destroy my credibility. My mental health, which had been improving since I left, started to deteriorate again. The constant harassment, the knowledge that he was still out there trying to destroy my life, was too much. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped being able to function. One night I took all the medication I had left, all the pills the therapist had prescribed when I thought I was losing my mind. I wanted it to stop. I wanted everything to stop. Daisy found me. She saved my life. I spent 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility, and then months in intensive therapy, learning to rebuild my sense of self, learning to trust my own perceptions again. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. 3 years later, I learned that Arthur had done this before. 2 other women came forward with similar stories after he was finally arrested for violating a different restraining order. They had experienced the same systematic gaslighting, the same isolation from friends and family, the same destruction of their mental health. I testified in court, helped put him away for 2 years on stalking and harassment charges. It was not enough, but it was something. I am doing better now. I have learned to trust myself again, learned to recognize the signs of manipulation and control. But I still check every corner of every room I enter, still verify everything twice, still keep detailed records of my daily activities, just in case I need to prove to myself that my memories are real. I will probably do that for the rest of my life. My best friend Millie and I were 21, and we had tickets to see a show at the Moore Theater downtown, something we had been looking forward to for months. My name is Daisy, and that night taught me that sometimes the most dangerous predators are not hiding in dark alleys or empty parking lots. Sometimes they walk right up to you in a crowd, wearing a costume that makes you trust them, makes you follow them willingly into danger. The Moore Theater is one of those beautiful old Seattle venues that makes you feel like you have stepped back in time. It opened in 1907, and everything about it feels historic and grand, from the ornate ceiling to the red velvet seats. Millie and I loved going to shows there because it felt special, felt like an event rather than just another concert. That night we were seeing an indie band we both loved, and we had been talking about it for weeks, planning our outfits, deciding where we would get dinner beforehand. The show was incredible. The band played for almost 2 hours, and the crowd was energetic and happy, everyone singing along and dancing. Millie and I were right in the middle of it all, losing ourselves in the music and the moment. It was one of those perfect nights where everything feels right, where you feel young and alive and exactly where you are supposed to be. When the show ended, we got swept up in the crowd, pushing toward the exits. The Moore holds about 1,500 people, and it seemed like all of them were trying to leave at the same time. Millie and I were holding hands, trying to stay together. But somewhere in the crush of bodies moving down the stairs and through the narrow doorways, we got separated. One moment she was right beside me, and the next moment there were 3 or 4 people between us. And then I could not see her at all. I tried to push against the flow of the crowd, tried to get back to where I had last seen her, but it was impossible. People were tired and ready to go home, and no one wanted to stop moving. I got carried along with them out onto 2nd Avenue, where the crowd dispersed into smaller groups heading toward bus stops and parking garages and late-night restaurants. I stood on the sidewalk looking around frantically, trying to spot Millie in the sea of faces. We had a rule for situations like this. If we got separated, we would both go to the main entrance of the venue and wait there. It was simple and effective, and we had used it before at other crowded events. So I started walking back toward the Moor's main entrance, scanning the crowd for Millie's bright blue jacket and dark curly hair. That is when the man approached me. He was wearing what looked like a security vest, one of those black vests with reflective stripes that event staff wear. He had a radio clipped to his belt and an official-looking name badge hanging from a lanyard around his neck. He looked legitimate, looked like someone who worked at the theater. He said, "Excuse me," and I turned to look at him. He asked if I was looking for someone, said he had seen a young woman who matched my friend's description heading toward the backstage alley looking sick. He said she had asked him for help, asked where the bathroom was, and he had pointed her toward the stage door entrance where there were staff restrooms. He said she had looked really unwell, like she might pass out. My first instinct was worry. Millie had been complaining earlier in the day about feeling a little queasy, and the crowd and the heat inside the venue could definitely have made her feel worse. It made sense that she would look for a bathroom, made sense that she would ask security for help. The man seemed genuinely concerned, seemed like he was just trying to help reunite us. He said he could take me to her, that the backstage area was restricted, but he could escort me through since it was a medical situation. He gestured toward an alley that ran alongside the theater, a narrow passage that I knew connected 2nd Avenue to the loading dock area behind the building. I had walked past that alley dozens of times, but had never gone down it. I started to follow him, but something made me hesitate. I cannot explain what it was exactly. Maybe it was the way he kept trying to position himself between me and the street, or the way his hand kept reaching out like he wanted to take my arm. Or maybe it was just some instinct that told me something was wrong. Whatever it was, I stopped walking. I said I would just call my friend instead. Pulled out my phone to dial Millie's number. The man's expression changed for just a second. Just a flicker of something that was not concern or helpfulness. It was frustration, maybe anger. But then the friendly expression was back, and he was saying that was probably a good idea, that he was sure my friend would turn up soon. But he did not leave. He stood there watching me, and I realized his hand was on my arm now. Not grabbing, but definitely touching, definitely maintaining contact. He said again that he could take me to her, that it would only take a minute, that my friend was probably worried about where I was. I pulled my arm away and said, "No, thank you." Said I was going to wait at the main entrance like we had planned. I started walking back toward the crowd of people still lingering outside the theater's main doors. The man followed me for a few steps, saying something about how I was being silly, how my friend needed help, how I should just come with him. I turned around and looked at him, really looked at him. The security vest looked wrong somehow. Too new and too clean compared to the worn vests I had seen the actual Moore staff wearing during the show. The name badge was blank, just a generic clip-on badge with no name or photo. The radio on his belt was not even turned on. I could see the power light was off. I said loudly, clearly, that I did not need his help and to please leave me alone. Several people in the crowd turned to look at us, and the man's face went hard and ugly for a moment. Then he turned and walked quickly back toward that alley, disappearing into the shadows between buildings. I was shaking as I made my way back to the main entrance. I found Millie there within 2 minutes, exactly where she was supposed to be, safe and healthy and confused about why I looked so scared. I told her what had happened, described the man and what he had said. Her face went pale. She pulled out her phone and showed me a news article from 3 weeks earlier. There had been an attempted abduction near the Moore Theater. A woman in her 20s had been approached by a man in a fake security vest who claimed her friend was sick backstage. Unlike me, she had followed him into the alley. He had tried to force her into a van that was waiting at the loading dock, but she had fought and screamed and managed to break away. The article included a description of the suspect. It matched the man who had just approached me. We found actual Moore Theater security staff and reported what had happened. They immediately radioed police and took a detailed description from me. They said there had been 2 other similar incidents in the past month, all using the same tactic. A man wearing a fake security vest, claiming someone's friend or family member was sick or hurt backstage, trying to lure young women into isolated areas around the theater. The police arrived and took my statement. They asked me to look at some photos, and I identified the man from a lineup of images. They said they had been looking for him for weeks, that he had been targeting women leaving concerts and events at several downtown venues. They had surveillance footage from other locations, but had not been able to identify him or catch him in the act. My description and the fact that he had tried again at the Moore gave them fresh leads to pursue. I found out 2 weeks later that they had arrested him. He was attempting the same scheme outside a different concert venue. But this time, undercover officers were watching. They caught him trying to lead a woman toward a parking garage, caught him with zip ties and duct tape in his pockets. The police said I was lucky, that if I had followed him into that alley, if I had not stopped and questioned what was happening, the outcome could have been very different. Millie and I still go to concerts together, still love live music and the energy of a crowd. But we do not go to downtown Seattle venues anymore. We stick to smaller neighborhood theaters, places where we can park close and walk directly from the car to the entrance and back again. We keep our phones charged and our keys in our hands. We never let ourselves get separated in a crowd, and if we do, we immediately text rather than going to look for each other. I think about that night often. Think about how easily I almost followed that man. He looked legitimate, sounded legitimate, played perfectly on my worry for my friend. If I had been a little more drunk, a little more distracted, a little less suspicious by nature, I would have walked right into that alley with him. I would have become another statistic, another cautionary tale, another reason for young women to be afraid. The thing that haunts me most is how many times I had seen that man before and never noticed him. When the police showed me the surveillance footage from other venues, I recognized him. He had been at other shows Millie and I had attended, other nights when we had been in those crowds, other moments when he could have approached us. He had been watching, waiting, choosing his targets carefully. I never go to downtown Seattle shows anymore without keeping my phone fully charged and my keys between my fingers. I trust my instincts now. Trust that feeling when something seems wrong, even if I cannot articulate why. And I never, ever follow someone who claims to be security without verifying it first, without seeing their real credentials, without making sure other people know where I am going. Those few seconds of hesitation, that small voice that told me to stop and think, probably saved my life that night. I listen to that voice now. I always will. I took a job as a night security guard at an office building in Pioneer Square to help pay for college. The building dated back to the 1890s, and I was told it survived the Great Seattle Fire. My name is Jacob, and what happened to me during those night shifts changed everything I thought I understood about reality, about history, about the thin membrane that separates our world from whatever existed before us. Pioneer Square is the oldest neighborhood in Seattle, and the buildings there carry weight, carry history in a way that newer parts of the city do not. Walking those streets feels different, especially at night when the bars close and the tourists leave, and you are alone with the brick and stone and shadows. The building where I worked was 6 stories tall, red brick with high arched windows, the kind of solid construction they do not do anymore. It housed various offices, tech startups and law firms and consulting companies, all empty after 6 in the evening. My shift ran from midnight to 8 in the morning, Sunday through Thursday. The pay was decent for essentially doing nothing, and the work was easy. I would arrive at midnight, check in with the evening guard, who was always happy to leave, and then spend the next 8 hours doing rounds through the building, monitoring the security cameras, and trying to stay awake. I brought textbooks and studied between rounds, drank too much coffee, listened to podcasts to pass the time. The building had 6 floors above ground. The security office was in the lobby, a small room with monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the building. My routine was simple. Every 2 hours, I would do a complete sweep of the building, taking the elevator to the 6th floor and then walking down the stairs, checking each floor as I descended. I would make sure all the doors were locked, all the lights in the stairwells were working, everything was as it should be. Then I would return to the security office and wait for the next round. I had been working there for about 3 weeks when it happened. It was a Tuesday night, or technically Wednesday morning, around 2 in the morning. The building was dead quiet in that way that old buildings get at night. Not silent, but filled with small sounds. The settling of old wood, the hum of HVAC systems, the occasional creak that makes you look up from whatever you are doing. I finished my 2 o'clock round without incident and returned to the security office. I was tired, fighting to keep my eyes open despite the coffee. I decided to do another round at 3 instead of 4, hoping the movement would wake me up. So at 3 in the morning, I left the security office and walked to the elevator bay. There were 2 elevators in the building, old ones that had been modernized over the years, but still retained their original brass fixtures and wood paneling. I pressed the call button and waited. The elevator on the right arrived first. The doors sliding open with that characteristic ding. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the 6th floor. The elevator started to move, but instead of ascending, it descended. I watched the floor indicator above the doors, watched the number 1 light up, then a moment later, go dark. The elevator was going down. There was no basement level in this building, at least not one I had access to or knew about. The building plans I'd been shown during my training only showed 6 floors above ground and the lobby level. But the elevator kept descending for several seconds before it finally stopped with a gentle bump. The doors opened. I stood there staring at what I was seeing, my brain struggling to process it. This was not a basement I recognized. The walls were old brick, not the painted concrete you would expect in a modern basement. The lighting came from gas lamps mounted on the walls, actual gas lamps with flickering flames, casting orange light and deep shadows. The air that drifted into the elevator smelled of earth and stone and something organic, like old wood or coal smoke. I could see a hallway stretching ahead, the brick walls on either side, the gas lamps spaced every 10 feet or so, creating pools of light. The floor was packed dirt, not concrete or tile. This was not right. This was not possible. I had never heard of this level, had never seen it on any building diagram, had never been told about it during my training. Every instinct told me to press the button for the lobby, to close those doors, get back to familiar territory. But curiosity, that terrible human curiosity that overrides common sense, made me step forward. I stepped out of the elevator into that impossible hallway. The temperature was noticeably cooler than the building above, maybe 50 degrees. Cold enough that I could see my breath in small clouds. The gas lamps hissed softly, their flames dancing and creating moving shadows on the brick walls. I turned and looked back at the elevator. It looked wrong here. Too modern, too clean, like a piece of the 21st century that had been dropped into the 19th. I started walking down the hallway, my footsteps making soft sounds on the packed earth floor. The hallway curved slightly to the right, and I could see doorways along the left side, dark openings leading to rooms I could not quite see into. As I walked, I started to hear sounds. Voices. Multiple voices speaking in what sounded like English, but with an accent or cadence I did not recognize, formal and old-fashioned. The voices were coming from ahead of me, from around the curve of the hallway. They were not loud, more like the murmur of conversation, like people gathered together talking about ordinary things. I slowed my pace, suddenly aware that I was trespassing somewhere, that I was somewhere I should not be. I reached the curve in the hallway and peered around the corner. What I saw made my heart stop. There were people. Maybe a dozen of them, men and women, dressed in clothing from another era. The women wore long dresses with high collars and their hair pinned up. The men wore suits with vests and pocket watches, some with handlebar mustaches and bowler hats. They were standing in small groups, talking to each other, gesturing, some of them laughing. They looked solid, real, not transparent or ghostly like you see in movies. But more disturbing was what they were standing in. It was clearly a storefront, or what remained of one. I could see a wooden counter, shelves with goods arranged on them, a large window that showed not the darkness outside, but daylight. Bright afternoon sun illuminating a street scene that was definitely not modern Seattle. The buildings across the street were wooden, and I could see horses, actual horses pulling wagons. I must have made a sound, a gasp, or a sharp intake of breath, because several of the people turned to look in my direction. Not at me exactly, more like they heard something but could not quite locate the source. Their faces were normal, human, but there was something about their eyes that was wrong. They were too dark, too shadowed, like looking into empty sockets. One of them, a man in a brown suit, started walking toward where I stood. He was looking right at me now, his head tilted slightly like he was trying to bring me into focus. His mouth moved, and I heard him speak, though his voice sounded like it was coming from very far away or through water. He said, "Who are you? You should not be here." That broke the paralysis that had frozen me in place. I turned and ran. I ran back down that brick hallway, my footsteps echoing off the walls, the gas lamps flickering as I passed. Behind me, I could hear more voices, could hear footsteps, multiple people following me. I did not look back. I just ran for that elevator, praying it would still be there, praying the doors would not have closed. The elevator was there, doors still open, still lit with modern fluorescent light that looked impossibly bright compared to the gas lamps. I threw myself inside and frantically pressed the button for the lobby, pressed it over and over, while looking down that hallway at the shadows that were moving closer, at the figures that were coming around the curve. The elevator doors finally closed. The elevator began to ascend. I watched the floor indicator, watched it light up with L for lobby, and felt a relief so intense it made my legs weak. The doors opened onto the familiar lobby, the modern tile floors and recessed lighting, and the door to the security office. I stumbled out and went straight to the office. I sat down in the desk chair, my heart pounding, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I pulled up the security camera feeds, cycled through every camera in the building. Everything looked normal, every floor empty and quiet. No people in period clothing, no brick hallways with gas lamps. Just a normal office building in the middle of the night. I called my supervisor, told him I had a family emergency and had to leave immediately. He was annoyed but said he would send someone to cover the rest of my shift. I walked out of that building at 3:30 in the morning and never went back. I quit by email the next day, forfeited my last paycheck rather than return to collect it. But I could not stop thinking about what I had seen. I spent the next week researching, trying to find some explanation that would let me sleep at night. That is when I learned about the Seattle Underground. After the Great Seattle Fire of 1889, the city rebuilt one story higher than the original street level to solve flooding problems from the tidal flats. The old first floors of buildings became basements, and the old streets became underground passages. Eventually, most of these were sealed off and forgotten. But they are still there, buried beneath modern Seattle. An entire ghost city of old storefronts and sidewalks preserved in the dark. The building where I worked had been built in 1892, 3 years after the fire. It would have been built on top of the ruins of whatever was there before. The official building records show no basement level, no connection to the Seattle Underground. But what if there was a connection that was never documented, never sealed off properly? What if that elevator shaft extended down into those forgotten passages? That still does not explain the people I saw, the solid-looking figures in period clothing who turned to look at me, who spoke to me. That does not explain the gas lamps that were lit, the store that looked fully stocked and operational, the window that showed a street scene from more than a century ago. I have no explanation for that. I have no rational way to process what I experienced. I have no explanation for what I saw that night, and I do not want one. Some doors should stay closed. Some levels should stay buried. Whatever exists in that space between the modern city and the old one, whatever keeps those gas lamps burning and those storefronts operating decades after they should have been abandoned and forgotten, I hope I never encounter it again. And I hope that elevator never takes anyone else down to that impossible basement where the past refuses to stay dead. I am a 24-year-old woman, and I lived alone in a small apartment in the University District right near Greek Row. So I was used to noise and people around at all hours. My name is Millie, and what I am about to tell you sounds impossible. Sounds like something from a movie or a ghost story told around a campfire. But it happened. Every word of it is true. And the woman who saved my life has been dead for over 70 years. The apartment was on the second floor of a converted house, one of those old Seattle homes from the early 1900s that had been divided into separate units to maximize rental income. It was not fancy, just a bedroom, a tiny bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, and a living room with windows that looked out onto the street. But it was mine, the first place I had ever lived completely alone, and I loved it despite its quirks and flaws. From the first week I moved in, I noticed strange things, small things. The bedroom door would swing open on its own even when I was certain I had closed it. The lights in the bathroom would flicker for no reason. I would smell lavender perfume, sweet and old-fashioned, even though I did not own any perfume and certainly not lavender. My landlord, an older woman who lived on the first floor, just smiled when I mentioned these things. She said the house had character, that old houses did strange things. I did not push it. Then one night, about 3 weeks after I moved in, I woke up around 2 in the morning to find my bedroom door standing wide open. I was certain I had closed it before going to bed. I always closed it, always locked it, even though I lived alone. It was a habit from childhood, a need to have that barrier between me and the rest of the apartment. But there it was, open, the hallway beyond dark and still. I got up and closed it, checked the lock. Everything seemed fine. I went back to bed but could not shake the feeling that something was off, that something was different. I lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house, the creaks and groans that old buildings make as they settle. Then I smelled it. Lavender. Strong and unmistakable, like someone wearing too much perfume had just walked past my bed. I turned on the light. The room was empty. Just me and my furniture and that overwhelming smell of flowers. I checked the window, thinking maybe it was coming from outside. Maybe someone in the house next door. But the smell was too strong, too present, like the source was right there in the room with me. I did not sleep well that night, and I started to pay more attention to the strange occurrences in the apartment. The bedroom door opening happened almost every night. Items would move, small things. A book I left on the coffee table would be on the kitchen counter. My keys would be by the door when I was certain I had left them in my purse. The lavender smell came and went, sometimes faint, sometimes so strong it made my eyes water. I decided to do some research. I went to the University of Washington Library and searched through old Seattle City directories and newspaper archives, trying to find information about the house, about who had lived there before it was converted into apartments. It took me almost a week of searching, but I finally found something. In 1952, a woman named Rosie Sutton had been murdered in that house. She was 28 years old, lived alone on the second floor, worked as a secretary downtown. Her ex-boyfriend had broken in one night, angry that she had ended their relationship, angry that she had moved on. He stabbed her in her bedroom. She died before the ambulance arrived. He was caught, tried, and sent to prison, where he died 15 years later. The article included a photo of Rosie. She was pretty, with dark hair styled in the fashion of the early 50s, wearing a dress with a modest collar and a pearl necklace. She looked kind, looked like someone you would want to be friends with. The article mentioned that neighbors remembered her love of gardening, particularly lavender, which she grew in pots on her windowsill. I sat in the library staring at that old newspaper photograph and felt a chill run down my spine. The lavender smell, the protective feeling I sometimes got in the apartment, like someone was watching over me. The door that opened on its own. It all made a horrible kind of sense. I should have been terrified. I should have moved out immediately, found a different apartment, gotten away from a place where a woman had been murdered in the same bedroom where I slept every night. But I did not feel afraid. The presence in the apartment, whatever it was, did not feel malevolent or threatening. It felt protective, watchful, like Rosie was still there, still looking out for the young woman living alone in her old home. I started talking to her. I know how that sounds. But late at night, when I smelled the lavender or saw the bedroom door open, I would say hello, would thank her for keeping me company. Sometimes I would tell her about my day, about classes at the university or problems with friends. I never got a response, never saw anything or heard a voice. But the apartment felt warmer somehow, felt less lonely. Then one night, about 4 months after I moved in, everything changed. I had gone to bed early, around 11, exhausted from a long day of classes and work. I fell asleep quickly and slept deeply until something woke me. I did not know what at first. I just opened my eyes and found myself completely alert, my heart pounding with adrenaline, even though I had no idea why. Then I heard it. A sound from the living room. A footstep. Then another. Someone was in my apartment. I froze in bed, barely breathing, listening. More footsteps, slow and deliberate. Someone moving through my living room toward the bedroom. My phone was in the living room, charging on the kitchen counter. I had no way to call for help. The bedroom door was closed, and I could see the handle starting to turn. That is when my bedroom door slammed shut. Not just closed, but slammed with such force that the whole wall shook. Then I heard the lock engage, that distinctive click of the deadbolt sliding into place. But I was in bed. I was 10 feet away from the door. There was no one else in the room. The door handle rattled violently, someone on the other side trying to force it open. Then a man's voice, low and angry, cursing. He was trying to get into my bedroom, and the only thing stopping him was a door that had locked itself. I heard a woman's voice then, clear and strong, shouting from somewhere in the apartment. "Get out! Leave her alone!" It was not my voice. It was not anyone I knew. It was a voice from another time, commanding and fierce. There was a crash, the sound of something heavy hitting the floor, then more cursing from the man. I heard him stumble, heard his footsteps running toward the apartment entrance, heard the front door bang open, and then footsteps pounding down the stairs. Then silence. I stayed in bed, shaking, too terrified to move. I waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Then my bedroom door unlocked. I heard the deadbolt slide back. The door swung open slowly, revealing the dark hallway beyond. The apartment was empty. The front door was standing wide open, cold air rushing in from outside. I grabbed my phone from where it had mysteriously appeared on my nightstand, even though I knew it should have been in the living room, and called 911. The police arrived within minutes. They searched the apartment and found evidence of forced entry at the front door, the lock broken, the wood around the frame splintered. They found a knife on the living room floor, a hunting knife with a 6-inch blade that did not belong to me. They asked if I had seen the intruder, if I could describe him. I told them the truth as far as I knew it. Someone had broken in, tried to get into my bedroom, then ran away. I did not mention the door slamming shut on its own, did not mention the woman's voice, did not mention Rosie. They would have thought I was crazy. What I did not tell the police was that my apartment had been trashed. The coffee table was overturned. A lamp was broken on the floor. Books had been knocked off shelves. It looked like someone had been thrown around the room, like there had been a violent struggle. But I had been locked in my bedroom the entire time. I had not heard a fight, had not heard anyone else. Just footsteps, cursing, and that woman's voice telling him to get out. The police caught him 3 days later. He had been following me for weeks, they said. Watching my routine, learning my schedule, waiting for the right opportunity. He had dozens of photos of me on his phone, pictures taken from across the street, pictures of me going to class, going to work, coming home. The police found evidence that he had been planning this for a long time, that he had chosen his moment carefully. When they arrested him, he kept talking about the woman. He said a woman in an old-fashioned dress, hair styled like it was the 1950s, had attacked him in my apartment. He said she threw a lamp at him, pushed him, screamed at him to leave. He said her eyes were wrong, too dark, like empty holes. He said she was not real, could not be real, but she had touched him, had hurt him. The police thought he was on drugs or making up a story. But I knew better. I pulled up the old newspaper photo of Rosie Sutton and showed it to the police officer taking my statement. I asked if this looked like the woman the intruder described. The officer looked at the photo, then at me, clearly confused about why I was showing him a newspaper clipping from 1952. He confirmed it matched the description the intruder had given, then asked how I knew. I said she used to live in my apartment, that she died there protecting herself from a man who broke in. The officer did not know what to say to that. I still live in that apartment. I know that seems strange. Seems like I should have moved out after what happened. But I feel safer here than I would anywhere else. I know Rosie is still here, still watching over me, still protecting the young woman who lives in the home that should have been hers for so many more years. Every night before bed, I say thank you to Rosie. I thank her for saving my life, for being there when I needed her most, for not letting what happened to her happen to me. Sometimes the lavender smell gets stronger, and I know she hears me. Sometimes I wake up to find my bedroom door standing open, and I know she has been checking on me, making sure I am safe. The man who broke into my apartment is in prison now, will be for a long time. The police said I was lucky, said if I had not locked my bedroom door, he would have gotten to me, that things would have ended very differently. I did not tell them I did not lock that door. I did not tell them about the voice that shouted at him to leave, about the lamp that flew across the room, about the woman in the old-fashioned dress that only he could see. I know she is still watching over me. I know that as long as I live in this apartment, I am not alone. And I know that whatever exists beyond death, whatever keeps Rosie Sutton tethered to this place where she died protecting herself, she has chosen to extend that protection to me. I am grateful for it. I am grateful for her. And I hope that somehow, in whatever way she can understand, she knows that her death was not meaningless, that she is still saving lives, still fighting back against the kind of man who took hers. Every night before I go to sleep, I make sure to say it out loud. Thank you, Rosie. Thank you for being here. Thank you for keeping me safe. And every night, the smell of lavender grows a little stronger, and I know she is still there, still watching, still waiting to protect the next woman who needs her. I know she is still watching over me.